The Old West, from the movies, hides a lot. Unexplained deaths, fortunes that vanished without a trace, people who simply disappeared. History books skipped over a lot. Some of these stories stayed buried for more than 100 years and only now are starting to make sense. In the next few minutes, you're going to learn about 10 cases that still leave experts without answers. Subscribe to our channel to follow more stories like this. Number 10. You probably know Butch Cassidy because of that classic movie with Paul Newman, but here's something Hollywood never told you. Maybe he didn't die in that shootout in Bolivia. The official story sounds pretty neat. Cassidy and the Sundance Kid fled to South America after years of robbing banks and trains. In 1908, Bolivian soldiers supposedly cornered the two in a tiny remote town. The end of the line for the most wanted outlaws of the time. Case closed, right? Not so fast. His sister Lula swore up and down that she met Butch alive at a family gathering in 1925, 17 years after his supposed death. She said he talked with their own father and other relatives like nothing had happened. And Lula wasn't alone in that. Other people close to the family also claimed they saw Cassidy around the same time. It gets even stranger. A former president of Bolivia, René Barrientos, publicly said that famous shootout was staged. Meanwhile, Pinkerton detectives who spent years hunting the pair insisted the two actually died in Uruguay, not Bolivia, and the bodies found after the clash were never officially identified as Cassidy and Sundance. According to Lula, her brother lived quietly for decades, maybe in Chile, Paraguay, or even in Spokane, Washington. She claimed he only died in 1930 of pneumonia on U.S. soil. If that's true, the most famous outlaw of the West pulled off something nobody thought was possible. He vanished completely and died of old age in his own bed. Number 9. Cochise led the Chiricahua Apaches at a time when the American Southwest was turning into a battlefield. Almost nothing is known about his early years. The story only starts to come into focus around 1860 when he was already leading his people between Arizona and northern Mexico. For more than a decade, he organized ambushes and attacks that left the U.S. Army not really sure how to respond. The guy knew every rock, every canyon in that desert. He used the terrain to his advantage in a way the soldiers just couldn't keep up with. The war only stopped in 1872 when a deal guaranteed land in southeastern Arizona for the Chiricahuas. Cochise accepted. 2 years later, in 1874, he died without getting to see that peace last very long. What happened after that is what gets people curious. They took his body to the Dragoon Mountains and buried it somewhere that was never revealed. Only a handful of warriors knew the spot. They said they put his horse and his dog in the grave with him, too. The idea was that neither of them would wander around looking for their owner and that nobody would ever disturb that rest. To this day, no one has found the tomb. Number 8. Have you ever heard of a gold mine so rich that men died trying to find it? And to this day, no one knows exactly where it is. The story starts in 1857 when two guys traveling to California decided to stop near a creek in the Sierra Nevada mountains. What they found there would change everything. A gold vein so concentrated it looked like something out of a movie. One of them filled his backpack with almost 5 kilos of the metal. But the luck didn't last long. The guy got sick on the way, and when he reached California, he had to sell everything, including a hand-drawn map, just to cover the doctor bills. Mark Twain also told a version of this legend. According to him, 3 German brothers fleeing an attack hid out in the mountains and ran into similar deposits. Every new story just added fuel to the fire. Then things got serious. Between 1869 and 1877, 2 men showed up every year in Stockton carrying nuggets that left everyone speechless. When one of them was dying, he confessed to a priest that they had pulled about $400,000 in gold from near Mammoth Peak. The exact spot? They took it to the grave. No one ever found that mine, but the legend pushed so many people up into the mountains that they ended up discovering Bodie, where more than 28,000 kilos of gold were pulled out. And the original mine? It's still out there somewhere waiting. Number 7. Jean-Baptiste. In 1862, Salt Lake City was hit with a scandal nobody saw coming. The city's gravedigger, Jean-Baptiste, was caught doing something that turns anyone's stomach. He was stealing dead people's clothes before burying them. When the authorities went into his house, They found pile after pile of clothes taken off corpses. The community was furious. Brigham Young, trying to calm the Mormon faithful, promised that at the resurrection, everyone would rise fully clothed, even those Baptiste had stripped. Punishment came fast. They decided to deport him to a deserted island in the Great Salt Lake. They left him there with almost nothing. And since the guy couldn't swim, it looked like a guaranteed life sentence. But a few weeks later, when they sent people to check on him, the prisoner was gone. That's when the mystery that was never solved began. One theory says he tried to swim and drowned. Years later, a skull showed up near the Jordan River, and a skeleton in chains was found in the area. A lot of people thought those were his remains, but nothing was ever confirmed. Another story says he was just too smart. They say he took apart the cabin he was in, used the boards and animal hides to put together a makeshift raft, rowed to shore and vanished. Some claim he caught a train to California and went to live in mining camps, places where nobody asked questions. Time only made it more confusing. Reports popped up saying Baptiste was captured later on, branded and mutilated as a grave robber. True or just an exaggeration from people who love a good creepy story? Nobody knows for sure. Salt Lake City never found out what really happened to its most infamous gravedigger. Number 6. Tom Horn, the gunman who ended up on trial. You probably know Tom Horn's story from the Steve McQueen movie in 1980. But what really happened was a lot more complicated than Hollywood showed. In the 1890s, the cattle business in Wyoming was in trouble. Prices had crashed, but the big ranchers kept buying herds, thinking the tide would turn. It didn't. And when the bills started piling up, those men needed someone to blame. The easy answer? Cattle rustlers. That's where guys like Tom Horn came in. The cattle barons paid him to do the dirty work. Horn showed up, handled the problem his way, and disappeared. Nobody asked too many questions. Everyone knew what was going on, but it was more convenient to pretend they didn't. Everything changed in July 1901 when Willie Nickel, a 14-year-old boy, was found shot to death near his family's ranch. A kid, not a rustler. The whole territory was shocked. If even a child could be a target, who would be safe? Marshal Joe LaForce put Horn on the suspect list. He called him in for a talk, got the man loaded with whiskey, and according to the records, Horn let out a few lines that sounded like a confession. That was enough to arrest him. In court, Horn's lawyers hammered the point that there was no direct proof, but the jury decided the circumstances were enough. In November 1903, he walked up to the gallows. The case seemed closed, but decades later, a mock jury took another look at the evidence and concluded there were too many holes in the original story. To this day, nobody knows for sure who killed Willie Nickel. Number 5. Albert Fountain wasn't the kind of man who backed down. A Union veteran of the Civil War, trained in law, a state senator in Texas, a judge, a sheriff. The guy did it all. And when you build a career like that, making enemies among powerful people, the consequences can show up out of nowhere. In February 1896, Fountain left Lincoln headed for Mesilla in the New Mexico Territory. Beside him in the wagon was Henry, his 8-year-old son. The trip had a clear purpose. He was carrying documents that could bring down a cattle-rustling ring tied to influential ranchers in the area. People with money, land, and the willingness to protect their interests at any cost. Friends warned Fountain about the risks. They said there were rumors of an ambush. He brushed off every warning and kept going. The last person to cross paths with father and son was a mail carrier who noticed something odd. 3 riders were trailing the wagon at a distance, unhurried, like predators waiting for the right moment. After that, nothing. Days later, the wagon turned up abandoned in the desert. Inside it, a blood-soaked handkerchief. No bodies, no confession, no answers. The case made national headlines and sparked decades of speculation. Some pointed to hired guns. Others mentioned the outlaw Black Jack Ketchum. But the name that really split opinions was Oliver Lee, an influential rancher and federal marshal who was even put on trial for the crime. His acquittal didn't settle anything. It only left the question hanging in the desert air. Who silenced Albert Fountain and his son for good? Number 4. Henry Plummer's hidden fortune. Have you ever stopped to think how easy it was to fool an entire town in 1863? Back then, Nobody did background checks. Nobody cared about your past. If you had the gift of gab and knew how to carry yourself, the job was yours. That's exactly how Henry Plummer got the sheriff's badge in Bannack, Montana. The town was growing fast because of gold, and it needed someone to keep order. Plummer showed up as the right man for the job. The problem was he had rumors of murder hanging over him that would have scared off any sensible person. But nobody looked into it, and Plummer took full advantage of that blind trust. The first thing he did was put together his own crew. He hired deputies who were better at scams than at enforcing the law. The last honest marshal from the previous administration tried to push back. He ended up with a bullet in his body. Who fired it? Nobody ever found out. The town swallowed the story and moved on. Meanwhile, Plummer ran a simple, effective setup. Miners sweated to pull gold out of Bannack's hard ground. He just seized the shipments, making up flimsy excuses. When the haul got too heavy for a mule to carry, he'd disappear into the hills, bury it all somewhere secret, and come back acting like nothing happened. Here's where the story gets interesting for anyone who loves a mystery. They say there are fortunes buried out there waiting for someone smart enough to find them. People talk about $200,000 in gold dust near Birdtail Rock. Nuggets hidden along a creek that empties into the Sun River. $50,000 stolen from a stagecoach buried near Cottonwood Creek. And another $300,000 resting somewhere in the hills of Cascade. Generations of treasure hunters have tried. Metal detectors, old maps, wild theories. Nobody has ever found a single grain of that gold. Plummer's fortune is still out there somewhere waiting. Number 3. Quo was born sometime around the 1880s in the dry mountains of Colorado. With an indigenous mother and an unknown father, he grew up in a kind of limbo most people can't even imagine. The tribes didn't want him. The white settlers heading west didn't either. From early on, he was on his own. His story starts out dark. Legend has it Quo killed his own half-brother to settle a blood score within the family. With that stain on him, there was no place left for him in the mountains. So he headed down toward a Las Vegas that was still just getting started. A handful of saloons, gambling, and plenty of people willing to solve problems with a gun. That's where the name Quo became a synonym for danger. Any unexplained crime? Blame him. Any strange disappearance? His doing. Parents used his name to scare rebellious kids before nightfall. Authorities even offered $2,000 for his capture, a fortune at the time. Bounty hunters tried their luck. None came back with the reward. Time passed. Quo vanished into the desert shadows until in February 1940, workers near the Hoover Dam found a mummified body in a cave. The detail that stood out, a double row of teeth, something extremely rare. Authorities called it. It was Quo. The Las Vegas Elks Club saw an opportunity and set up a creepy display, charging admission for the public to see the remains of the legendary fugitive. But between theft and neglect, the bones disappeared. To this day, nobody knows where they ended up. Number 2. Pancho Villa started out as an outlaw hunted by the authorities. He ended up commanding thousands of men in one of the bloodiest civil wars in the Americas. The Mexican Revolution turned this bandit from Chihuahua into a general who defeated professional armies and even challenged the United States. When the dust settled, Villa did something nobody expected. He put down his weapons and became a rancher. The man who used to cross borders on horseback was now taking care of cattle and crops. It seemed like the end of the story. But in July 1923, gunmen ambushed his car on a street in Peril. 8 shots ended his life right there. And this is where the part nobody can really explain begins. 3 years after the burial, someone broke into Villa's tomb in the middle of the night. When they opened the coffin the next morning, the head was gone. It just wasn't there anymore. Who did it? Nobody was arrested. Nobody confessed. The family only found out about more problems decades later. In 1976, the Mexican government decided to move Villa's remains to a monument in Mexico City. His granddaughter swore that other bones went missing during that transfer. So the question is, what exactly is in that official tomb today? A story that's been going around for years says Villa's widow got so worried about thieves that she ordered the remaining bones swapped with those of an unknown woman. If that's true, the revolutionaries' remains could be anywhere. And the theories only get weirder. A pawn shop in El Paso tried to sell what they called Villa's trigger finger for almost $10,000. Others swear Yale's secret skull and bones society bought the head as a trophy. To this day, nobody has proven anything. Number 1. Picture this. A ship in the middle of the desert. It sounds like something out of a movie, but the story behind it is real. And to this day, nobody has been able to fully explain it. We're talking about the Colorado Desert, that sea of sand that stretches across California. Since the late 1800s, locals have sworn they've seen a Spanish galleon buried in the dunes. The first report ran in the Los Angeles Star in 1870 when a treasure hunter said he'd found the ship. Weeks later, another guy named Charlie Klusker said the same thing and insisted the vessel was in great shape. None of those reports brought solid proof, but the legend only grew. Over time, the galleon turned into a pirate ship loaded with stolen gold and silver. The question that won't go away is simple. How the hell did a boat end up so far from the ocean? The answer might be in the land itself. Not far from there is the Salton Sink, a region that has formed huge lakes depending on shifts in climate. In the San Felipe Mountains, you can find layers of oyster shells. Proof that all of that used to be seafloor. Some researchers believe the ship came in through the Gulf of California, ran aground when the waters dropped, and ended up buried by sand over the centuries. If that's true, the crew probably died in the brutal heat, leaving the ship behind like a time capsule. Even today, adventurers show up with metal detectors and shovels, but nobody has ever brought back so much as a single coin. And maybe that's exactly the mystery that keeps the whole thing so fascinating.